Welcome to my garden, GinGeeGoodEarth programs, production 6, Roman numeral 6, Part 7, a special edition on Kennedy, his book that he wrote, The Wit and Wisdom of John F. Kennedy. It was compiled by the editors of Hallmark Cards, and I will be reading on Chapter 1, The Peace. This is June 18th, Universal History of United States of America. I welcome you to the picture show. This is the Look and See showcase, where we look and see and learn all about United States history, and my objective is to educate, amuse, enrich, and that nice matters. And I will be discussing current events, and nothing is in dress rehearsal. This is a program that I put together to share my knowledge and my education for you. So let's get started. The Wit and Wisdom of John F. Kennedy. And here, there's a picture of John F. Kennedy. On peace. This country is moving, and it must not stop. It cannot stop. For this is a time for courage and a time of challenge. Neither conformity nor complacency will do. Neither the fanatics nor the faint-hearted are needed. So let us not be petty when our cause is so great. Let us not quarrel amongst ourselves when our nation's future is at stake. Let us stand together with renewed confidence in our cause, united in our heritage of the past and our hopes for the future, and determined that this land we love shall lead all mankind into new frontiers of peace and abundance. To have been delivered at Austin, Texas, November 22nd, 1963. I was 3 years old then. Peace does not rest in the charters and covenants alone. It lies in the hearts and minds of all people, and no act, no pact, no treaty, no organization can hope to preserve it without the support and the wholehearted commitment of all people. September 20th, 1963. There are many kinds of strength, and no one kind will suffice. Above all, words alone are not enough. The United States is a peaceful nation, and where our strength and determination are clear, our words need merely to convey conviction, not belligerence. If we are strong, our strength will speak for itself. If we are weak, words will be of no help. To have been delivered at Dallas, Texas, November 22nd, 1963. According to the ancient Chinese proverb, a journey of 1,000 miles must begin with a single step. My fellow Americans, let us take that first step. Let us, if we can, get back from the shadows of war and seek out the way of peace. And if that journey is 1,000 miles or even more, let history record that we, in this land, at this time, took the first step, July 26, 1963. And my comment on this is make war illegal. We don't need it. The earth is 9 continents. We have plenty of space and room. Back to John F. Kennedy. Pursue peace, he quoted. The Bible tells us, and we shall pursue it with every effort and every energy that we possess. But it is an unfortunate fact that we can secure peace only by preparing for war. We shall be remembered either as part of the generation that turned this planet into a flaming funeral pile, or a generation that met its vow, and to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Pray for peace. That's what I say. We stand today on the edge of a new frontier, a frontier unknown opportunities and perils, a frontier of unfulfilled hopes and threats. July 15th, 1960. If we all can persevere, if we can in every land and office look beyond our own shores and ambitions, then surely the age will dawn in which the strong are just and the weak secure and the peace preserved. Winning the peace is a lonely battle. Of those to whom much is given, much is required. What kind of peace do we seek? Not a pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war, not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about the genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, and the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and to build a better life for their children, not merely peace in our time, but peace for all time. June 10th, 1963. Peace is a daily, a weekly, a monthly process, gradually changing opinions, slowly eroding old barriers, quietly building a new structures. And however undramatic the pursuit of peace, that pursuit must go on. September 19th, 1963. Let us resolve to be the masters, not the victims of our history, controlling our own destiny without giving way to blind suspicions and emotions. Let us recognize both the gains we have made down the road to peace and the great distance yet to be covered. September 28th, 1963. Peace is not solely a military or technical problem. It is primarily a problem of politics and people. And unless man can match his strides in weaponry and technology with equal strides in social and political development, our great strength, like that of the dinosaur, will become incapable of proper control, and man, like the dinosaur, will decline and disappear. September 25th, 1961. Very well done, John F. Kennedy. Next, I want to read from the best-loved poems of the American people, the introduction. This book began in the heart of a little newsboy in Knoxville, Tennessee. He loved poetry. To him, poetry meant music and ideas. It sang to him and it spoke to him. It inspired him. Particularly, did it inspire him? The boy grew up. He continued selling newspapers all his life. I used to read 5 newspapers, 5 o'clock a.m. in the morning for 25 years. Finally, my family said, "No more newspapers." Now I read the Epoch Times newspaper. Even the old Pittsburgh Press and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the Tribune Review doesn't satisfy my taste buds for reading. Too much fake news in the press. Throughout his life, he was Adolph S. Ox, publisher of the New York Times. Throughout his life, Mr. Ox loved poetry. He was keenly interested in the number of inquiries regarding that it came to the editorial rooms of the New York Times Book Review, and he started the queries and answers page to handle them. Boy, he'd be rolling in his grave now, knowing how rampant the propaganda fake news machine is rolling out the press in the press room. The selection of verses that are here collected under the title Best Loved Poems of the American People is based on the most frequently requested items that have cleared through these columns over a period of 3 decades. During a large part of his time, Hazel Feliman has been the editor of Queries and Answers from every state in the Union and even beyond its borders. Have come countless letters asking for this poem, or that, or for the complete poem whose theme is such and such, or the song whose refrain is thus and so. Mrs. Philemon has long had her finger on the poetry pulse of the nation. Its heartbeats are truly registered in this, her book. One day Mr. Ox appeared at Mrs. Philemon's desk and said, "There's a line that has been running through my head lately, and I wish I could get the whole poem. I read it when I was a boy, and I don't remember the author's name. It begins, 'I am a stranger in the land where my forefathers trod.'" So let me read that to you today. It's called Death. I'm a stranger in the land where my forefathers trod, a stranger I unto each heart, but not unto my God. I pass along the crowded streets, unrecognized my name. This thought will come amid regrets, my God is still the same. I seek with joy my childhood's home, but strangers claim the sod, not knowing where my kindred roam, still present is my God. They tell me that my friends all sleep beneath the valley clod. Oh, it's not faith submissive sweet, I have no friend save God. Unknown, originally signed, Beatrice. And it's on Faith and Reverence. And again, I welcome you to the GinGeeGoodEarth program, and I'm going to finish up my chapter 3 in A Universal History of the United States of America, 1830. So let's redo for success. Mr. Williams for some years established no particular church order, inviting persons of all religious sentiments to unite with his rising plantation. After a few years, he and several of his people renounced the baptism of their infancy and were re-baptized and united in a church which was, I believe, the first Baptist church in New England. On account of the differences of sentiment which subsequently prevailed in the church, in the year 1653 it was divided and became 2 churches. Mr. Williams purchased the lands of the plantation of the Indian proprietors, and no man enjoyed their confidence in a higher degree. He was the father of the colony, and for some time he appears to have possessed and exercised the principal powers of government which existed. In some of the first years of the Providence plantation, the people suffered very sensibly from scarcity. The product of their forest and rivers saved them from perishing by famine. The most of the fathers of New England experienced the evils of war and famine in a degree of which their posterity are unable to form any adequate conception. At the same time of the banishment of Mrs. Hutchinson from Massachusetts, several people who had favored her religious opinions, and of course differed in principle from the prevailing sentiments of the churches, chose to remove the colony. One of these was Mr. William Codington, a gentleman of education and affluence, who had been for several years an assistant and one of the most worthy magistrates of the Massachusetts government. In the year 1638, Mr. Codington, with a few others, removed to Narragansett Bay and commenced settlement of Rhode Island. These planters immediately united in civil compact, to which Mr. Codington and 17 others subscribed their names. The infant plantation furnishes an instant of something of simplicity in natural existence, of patriarchal government. Mr. Codington, a man of great virtue and natural dignity of character, possessing the confidence of all, was created their magistrate, to whom was delegated the necessary powers of civil government. By the friendly assistance of Mr. Williams, he purchased the island of the Indians, and in consequence of its pleasantness and fertility, in few years it became a flourishing settlement. In the year 1644, a Baptist church was formed in Newport, which was afterwards divided into two. A Congregational church was formed in Newport in 1720, and a second one in 1728. These two churches afterwards enjoyed the ministry of the most eminent American divines of the last century, President Stiles and Dr. Hopkins. These settlements being destitute of any chartered government from the mother country, in 1643 Mr. Williams went to England, and by assistance of Mr. Vane, who had been governor of Massachusetts, obtained a liberal charter of incorporation of Providence and Rhode Island plantations. The form of government provided by the incorporation was essentially similar to that of established in the adjacent colonies. Mr. Williams lived to a great age and was chosen several times governor of the colony. As early as the year 1607, some of the Pettanees of the northern colony of Virginia began a settlement at the mouth of the river Sagadahoc, now Kennebec. They laid the plan of an existence in opulent state, but in the consequence of the death of the principal patrons and the severities endured by the planters, the settlement broke up the following year, and whose were living returned to England. The first permanent settlements made within the district of Maine commenced about the year 1630, and the eldest towns of Kittery and York. In the year 1635, Sir Ferdinando Gorges obtained from the Council of Plymouth a grant of the tract of land lying between the rivers of Sagadahoc and Piscataqua. It is supposed that he instituted civil government in province. Courts were held as early as 1636, who appeared to have exercised legislative and judicial powers. In 1639, Gorges obtained from the Crown a charter conveying the amplest powers of jurisdiction. He appointed a governor and council who administered justice to the people to their council general satisfaction for a number of years. After the death of the proprietor, these powers of government were generally supposed to have expired. The different settlements formed some kind of voluntary compacts and elected their own rulers, but the people soon perceiving the inconveniences of the state of things, in the year 1652, united the government of Massachusetts and became an integral part of that colony. In the first settlements, churches were early established who enjoyed the labors of some of the worthiest ministers of their time. In general, their early civil and religious institutions were very similar to those of Massachusetts. And again, church was a place where they broke bread, had picnics, had social, civil, nice matters, mottos, and they studied moral obligations of people and friendship. In the first settlements, churches were early established, who enjoyed the labors of some of the worthiest ministries of their time. In general, their early civil and religious institutions were very similar to those of Massachusetts. No part of New England had suffered so much from the hostility of the natives as the district of Maine. Many ferocious tribes of savages were settled on the rivers with which the country abounds, and from the small progress made by the settlements for a long period, they were unable to subdue their power or prevent their predatory incursions. From the proximity of that district to Canada and all the wars between England and France, for a century after its first settlement, they were exposed to the hostile incursions of the savages. Stimulated by the most artful and unfeeling enemy, many of their towns have been pillaged and burnt, and many of the people made captives and slain. So late as the war in 1745, many of the towns suffered severely from savage hostility. In my hometown, we have the Massey Harbinson fire, and the hostility was very much felt in the community way back when. The state of Vermont, the youngest of the New England states, has advanced in population and wealth more rapidly than either of the others, and holds a respectable rank in their number. The tract of the country composing that state, lying between the states of New Hampshire and New York, to which both laid an imperfect claim, remained long unoccupied. And always remember, first Americans and the Europeans started intermarrying and picking up their different cultural way of life, and they benefited each other in those ways. In this book, it'll tell you that education was a primary mission of the immigrants and the European descendants who arrived in America, and education was a priority. I can't wait to read that chapter. Okay, and so late as the War of 1745, many of the towns suffered severely from savage hostility. The state of Vermont, the youngest of the New England states, has advanced in population and wealth more rapidly than either of the others, and holds a respectable rank in their number. The tract of country composing the state, lying between the states of New Hampshire and New York, to which both laid an imperfect claim, remained long unoccupied. In the year 1724, in the time of severe Indian War, the government of Massachusetts erected Fort Dummer within the present town of Brattleboro, and commenced a small settlement near the fort. This was then supposed to be within the limits of Massachusetts, but on running the province lines in 1741, it fell within the state of Vermont. In the year 1731, the French from Canada erected the well-built fort at Crown Point, and on the west side of Lake Champlain, and soon after began a settlement on the eastern side of the lake, opposite to the fort. I have skied Sugarbush, Vermont, and at the tippy top of the mountains you can see Lake Champlain. From the time in which the provincial line between Massachusetts and New Hampshire was ascertained till after the peace of 1763, when it became a subject of controversy, the territory of Vermont was considered as belonging to New Hampshire. The town of Bennington, as it is one of the best, is considered the oldest town in the state. This township was granted to certain proprietors in the year 1749 by the governor of New Hampshire, and called after his name. Soon after this great settlement of that town commenced. In 4 or 5 of the following years, few other towns were granted by the government of New Hampshire. On the western side of the Connecticut River, the War of 1755 put a stop to these grants and settlements. In the progress of the war, the territory of Vermont became the scene of military operations. These events produced a general acquaintance with many parts of the country, and towards the conclusion of the war, extensive grants of townships were made by the New Hampshire government, and numerous openings were made in the wilderness. From 1764 to the commencement of the American War, the new settlers were harassed with conflicting claims to their territory, maintained by the provinces of New Hampshire and New York. Notwithstanding these embarrassments, the infant settlements gradually increased by immigrations from the several New England provinces at the commencement of the War of 1775. The people of Vermont warmly espoused the American cause, and during its continuance performed many important services as the authority of the rural governments became avowed, the people, finding themselves wholly destitute of any bonds of civil government, public settlement naturally adverted to the necessity of some political regulations for the general safety. There have been several conventions of committees of towns to deliberate on the measures to be pursued in January 1777. A convention of delegates from the respective towns held at Westminster resolved that the territory now included in that state should be considered as a free and independent jurisdiction of state, to be forever hereafter called, known, and distinguished by the name of New Connecticut, alias Vermont. From this period, Vermont became an independent state, and in 1791 was admitted a member of the American Union in 1791. The settlers of Vermont were mostly immigrants from Connecticut, and for several years after the peace of 1783, their number increased with an unprecedented rapidity. Their civil and religious institutions were generally copied from the existing in Connecticut. A congregational church was early established at Bennington. Benningwinworth was an older name, and continued many years under the ministry of the pious and worthy Mr. Dewey. In most of the towns, churches established in an early period of their settlement, who have enjoyed the labors of many able and faithful ministers of Christ. The churches and ministries in Vermont have been remarkable for uniformity in religious sentiment and practice, conformable to the Calvinistic system and to the doctrines of the gospel, to ably vindicated by several New England divines of the last century. The late Dr. Job Swift, who has been styled the Apostle of Vermont, not more distinguished for abilities and piety than for indefatigable labors, was an eminent instrument of organizing and establishing the churches and religious institutions of the state, and was unshaken pillar of divine truth. In the midst of his labors in the service of his master and his fellow men, was suddenly removed to his eternal rest. The churches and the people of the state have been favored with many gracious manifestations of the special influences of the Holy Spirit. In reviewing the interest of vital religion and bringing many souls into the holy kingdom of the Redeemer, probably no instance can be found in the history of men where all the public institutions of civil, moral, and religious character are held so entirely under the constant control of public sentiment as in the state of Vermont. It is earnestly hoped that through the merciful favor of heaven, that people may be long worthy of the possession of the many privileges which they now enjoy. We have remarks upon the religion of the colony. I'm going to focus on the picture show, and I have to get a drink of coffee. Okay, we're finishing up chapter 3. Remarks upon the religion of the colony. It is a very singular fact that while the English government and all ecclesiastical authority were using their most vigilant exertions to suppress evangelical religion and put an effectual stop to the progress of Puritanism, and while the New England colonies were reformed for the express purpose of the promotion of these objects, they expressed the purpose of promotion of these objects, they were suffered to proceed with very little molestation. The company that formed the severities of the ecclesiastical tyranny were fearful of forming a settlement in any of the dominions of the British king without the promise that they should not be obstructed in the free exercise of their religion. Frequent and earnest solicitations were made into the rural court for such a permission. But as such a concession would not comport with the maxims of bigoted prince. But as such a concession would not comport with the maxims of a bigoted prince and a prosecuting prelate, it was never obtained. The adventurers, therefore, committed their case to the protection of God, and they were not disappointed. The succeeding companies, through many important civil privileges, were secured to them by patent, could obtain no more than indirect imitations, that they might enjoy liberty of conscience in the services of religion. They hoped indeed that God, whom they served, would remember their wants, and that the distance of 3,000 miles would mitigate the rage of persecution. The religious order which they established was directly opposed to the sentiments of the government, and was such as they had long labored to suppress. But through the interference and various causes in which the hand of God was particularly visible, they were left undisturbed, till their churches had become firmly established. Archbishop Laud resolved at length to interfere, and the subject colonies to same ecclesiastical order as the mother country, but his death soon put an end to his design. The long period of civil wars and the commonwealth which then succeeded enabled the ecclesiastical institutions of the colonies to acquire such a consistence as could not easily be dissolved. That remarkable interval in the English monarchy, of which there has been no equal in 10 centuries, was the occasion of the establishment of the gospel order in New England churches. How unsearchable and holy are the appointments of God! In 1656, Quakers made their first appearance in the Massachusetts colony, but the legislature passed laws for their banishment, that any Quaker returning from banishment to renew his practices against the colony should be put to death. Under this law, 4 persons were executed. Any master of any vessel that should bring any of his sect into the jurisdiction of Massachusetts should be subject to a fine of £100. Notwithstanding this arbitrary law, appears that this sect continued increase, even down to the present time, and holds a very respectable station among other honorable societies. The Roman Catholics first came to America in 1632. The first Baptist church in America was formed at Providence in 1639. Manners and customs. The laws of the colonies in 1639 prohibited the custom of drinking healths. In 1651, the legislature passed laws prohibiting all persons whose estate did not exceed £200 from wearing any gold or silver lace, or any bone lace that cost above 2 shillings per yard. The selectmen were authorized to take notice of the fashions, the apparel of the people, especially in wearing the ribands and the great boots. In 1647, it was ordered that no person under the age of 20 years should use any tobacco unless he should bring a certificate from a physician that it was useful to him. Agriculture was first attended by a clearing and forests by cutting down the trees and digging up the stumps before tillage. The first neat cattle were brought into New England by Mr. Winslow in 1624. In 1633, the cattle in Virginia had increased to about 1,000 head. They also raised a large quantity of wheat and rye, some beans, flax, and hemp. Commerce. The colony imported all their merchandise from England and exported thither peltry, tobacco, beef, pork, grain, and fish. The importations from England much exceeded the exports Thither, the skins of deer, elk, buffalo, and furs of otters, bear, fox, muskrat, and beaver were purchased of Indians for rum, blankets, and exported to England. Arts and manufacturers. In 1620, 100 persons came from England to carry on the manufacture of silk, potash, tar, pitch, glass, and salt, and did not succeed. All cordage, sailcloth, and mats came from England. Brick and framed houses were soon built in large towns. The first mill was a windmill built near Watertown. The first vessel was built in Massachusetts, which was called the Blessing of the Bay. In 1633, a ship of 60 tons was built at Melford. In 1641, one was built at Salem of 300 tons and another of 160 tons at Boston. Printing was first introduced in 1639. The first thing printed was a freeman's oath, the next an almanac, and the third a collection of psalms. Education. Scarcely had the people opened the forest and constructed the habitations before they directed their attention towards the education of their children. Schools were free to all classes of people. The poor had the same advantage in educating their children as the rich. Population of Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont was estimated at about 70,000 people. But it is impossible to ascertain very exactly the population of the American colonies at the close of this period. The estimates made by writers are vague and often contradictory. It is worthy of particular notice that so small a population scattered over such an extent of country should have been able to conquer so many Indians, and thereby save themselves from savage destruction. The end on Chapter 3, and we'll begin the Universal History of the United States, Part 2, Chapter 4, Discovery and Progress of the Middle and the Southern States. So there you have it. And so I will end this program today, and today is June 18th, 2020. Thank you for participating and watching the picture show and learning about the history of early America colonies. And remember to check Etsy.com, Trout Lily. I have 3 books. Honey for All teaches you beekeeping and poetry and how to start the career of beekeeping. We do need more beekeepers in America. The second book, Pittsuburgh, Victoria, and All That Is Gilded, teaches you all about my theatrical theater work in the Pittsuburgh Victorian Gibson Girl theater productions. And the third book, White Buffalo Spirit, which I will read in its entirety, is an inspiring love story by sincere devotees of the American indigenous culture, all combined by hands of dedication. The combination of interesting dialogue, early native recipes, fine illustrations, the blend of nature and spirituality reflects unbiased impression of those who represent the first spirituality in the United States of America. These human beings never fought or killed over religion, a word not even in their vocabulary. The authors brilliantly intertwines an overall view of the first American culture and a precious spirituality that cannot be separated from the original native way of life, the woodland Indian. And again, thank you for being attentive and having patience. Again, you can write to me at gibsongirls@mail.com. So it's GIBSONGIRLS@mail.com. So it's GibsonGirls@mailman without the man.com. GibsonGirls@mail.com. And my suggestion is that you go back to the 35 videos and start from the beginning and work your way through the Roman numerals and the parts of the sections and enjoy the entertainment. I'm also reading a book on the Vikings, and that's going to be my very next video. And I also have a special video on poetry for people that enjoy cats. And it's all poetry written about the cats. And I hope that you enjoy today. And always remember, every morning wake up with a song in your heart and be positive and have a great day. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.